Good evening. Tonight, we are not visiting a battlefield, following a famous president, or witnessing a dramatic moment that changed history forever. Instead, we are doing something much quieter. We are simply arriving home in a typical American neighborhood sometime around the middle of the 1960s, just as dinner is about to begin. Nothing spectacular is happening. No headlines are being written. No one living here believes that historians will someday care about the meatloaf cooling on the kitchen counter, or the sound of a pressure cooker softly hissing nearby. Yet these ordinary evenings quietly shaped millions of lives. So before you settle in, you might like to dim the lights, get comfortable beneath a blanket, and allow your thoughts to drift toward another era, one measured less by smartphone notifications and more by the familiar ticking of a kitchen clock. Imagine a peaceful suburban street in America around 1964. The sun has slipped low enough that long shadows stretch across neatly trimmed lawns. Children's bicycles rest on their sides beside driveways. Somewhere nearby, a lawn mower has finally gone silent after an afternoon of work. The air carries several familiar smells all at once. Fresh-cut grass, warm asphalt still holding the day's heat, someone grilling hamburgers, another family baking chicken, perhaps even the sweet scent of an apple pie cooling near an open kitchen window. Every house seems slightly different, yet strangely familiar. Many belong to families that consider themselves comfortably middle class. Not wealthy enough to employ servants. Not poor enough to worry constantly about the next meal. Instead, they occupy a growing part of American society that expanded rapidly after the Second World War. New neighborhoods appeared almost overnight. Rows of similar homes stretched farther from city centers than ever before. Owning a house had become a realistic dream for millions of families. Inside these homes, dinner represented much more than eating. It marked the unofficial ending of the workday, the beginning of family time, a pause between the responsibilities of daylight and the quiet hours before sleep. A father might pull into the driveway, driving a large American sedan. Perhaps it is dusty from commuting. He turns off the engine. For just a moment, everything becomes still. Then comes the familiar metallic click of the car door opening. Inside the house, someone may notice. Not because of a phone notification. Not because a security camera sends an alert. Simply because people become familiar with routines. The children know roughly what time Dad gets home. The family dog certainly knows. Within seconds, paws scratch happily across the kitchen floor. Meanwhile, dinner is reaching its final stage. Unlike today, where frozen meals or restaurant delivery are common choices, many middle-class households still prepare dinner almost entirely at home. This meal has usually required planning since earlier in the day. Perhaps even yesterday. A grocery trip earlier in the week determined much of tonight's menu. Fresh vegetables have limited shelf life. Milk arrives in glass bottles. Bread may already be a few days old. Leftovers are saved carefully. Waste is something to avoid. The kitchen itself feels surprisingly busy despite having fewer appliances than many modern homes. There is no air fryer. No microwave oven. The household microwave will not become common for many more years. Instead, nearly everything depends upon ovens, stovetops, pressure cookers, mixing bowls, and careful timing. The refrigerator hums softly. Its rounded edges reflect the design style of the era. Bright pastel colors remain fashionable. Some kitchens feature pale yellow cabinets. Others lean toward mint green. Many display cheerful curtains decorated with fruit or tiny flowers. Nothing seems especially luxurious. Everything simply feels practical. Built to last. Used every single day. Dinner usually revolves around a protein, a vegetable, bread, and perhaps potatoes or rice. Meals vary by region. In the Midwest, casseroles are extremely common. In the South, fried chicken appears often. In New England, seafood enters the menu more frequently. Across much of the country, meatloaf becomes one of the defining symbols of weeknight dinners. Ground beef stretches further than expensive steaks. It feeds large families economically. Served alongside mashed potatoes covered in gravy, it creates a meal that feels satisfying after a long day's work. Nobody calls it comfort food. It is simply dinner. One interesting detail often surprises modern observers. Portion sizes are generally smaller than many restaurant meals today. Dinner plates themselves are often slightly smaller. Dessert exists, but not necessarily every evening. A slice of cake might be reserved for birthdays. Cookies may wait until after dishes are washed. Ice cream remains a treat rather than an expectation. The idea of supersized meals has not yet entered everyday American life. Most families eat until comfortably full. Then they stop. The television may already be switched on somewhere in the house. Yet in many homes, it does not dominate dinner itself. Some families insist it remain off until everyone has eaten. Others allow quiet background programs if the kitchen opens toward the living room. Still, conversation usually matters. Parents ask about school. Children describe playground adventures. Someone complains about mathematics homework. Someone else mentions tomorrow's baseball practice. The topics feel ordinary. Exactly because they are ordinary, they become memorable. History often celebrates extraordinary moments. Real life usually happens during conversations no one records. Table manners carry real importance. Children hear familiar reminders almost every evening. Sit up straight. Chew with your mouth closed. Pass the butter politely. Don't interrupt. Finish your vegetables. Whether every child obeys these instructions is another question entirely. But the expectations remain remarkably consistent. Dinner functions as an informal classroom. Parents teach patience, listening, gratitude, respect. Without calling them life lessons, they quietly become life lessons anyway. The dinner table also reflects another reality of the era. Gender expectations remain quite traditional in many households. Although millions of women work outside the home, especially in cities and certain professions, many middle-class suburban families still expect mothers to manage most cooking responsibilities. Recipe books marketed toward homemakers fill bookstore shelves. Magazine advertisements proudly showcase sparkling kitchens where preparing dinner appears almost effortless. Reality is usually far less glamorous. Cooking every night demands planning, budgeting, cleaning, shopping, remembering everyone's preferences, and somehow placing warm food onto the table at nearly the same time each evening. It is work. Important work. Often invisible work. Perhaps the greatest luxury at a 1960s dinner table is not the food itself. It is predictability. Monday feels somewhat like last Monday. Tuesday resembles next Tuesday. People know roughly what time dinner begins. They know who will likely sit where. They recognize familiar recipes. Routine creates comfort. In an America experiencing enormous cultural change, from the space race to the civil rights movement, many families find reassurance inside these small nightly rituals. Outside, history moves quickly. Inside, someone asks whether there are enough biscuits for everyone. And somehow, both realities exist at the same time. Part 2. The long afternoon before dinner. If you had wandered into a typical middle-class American home at 2 o'clock on a weekday afternoon in 1965, you might have wondered why the kitchen already seemed busy. After all, dinner was still hours away. The children were at school. The father was still at work. The dining table was empty. Yet dinner had already begun, not in the oven perhaps, but in someone's careful planning. For many families, especially those with a stay-at-home mother, the evening meal was not something thrown together in 20 minutes. It was the result of dozens of small decisions made throughout the day. Which vegetables were still fresh? Was there enough milk left? Would yesterday's roast become tonight's sandwiches, or should it be transformed into a casserole? Could the week's grocery budget stretch to another pound of ground beef? These were quiet calculations, repeated thousands of times across neighborhoods from California to Maine. No one called it meal planning. It was simply part of running a household. The kitchen itself often became the busiest room in the house. Sunlight streamed through patterned curtains, falling across polished countertops made of laminate rather than expensive stone. The refrigerator hummed steadily in the corner. A calendar hung on the wall, marked with birthdays, school events, church meetings, and perhaps a reminder that garbage collection would come on Thursday morning. Near the telephone sat a small notepad. Whenever someone noticed they were running low on sugar, flour, butter, or coffee, it might be written there. Nothing disappeared into a digital shopping app. The list waited patiently until the next grocery trip. Sometimes the handwriting belonged to several family members, each adding another forgotten item. Many kitchens still held recipe boxes filled with handwritten index cards. Some recipes had been copied from neighbors. Others came from mothers or grandmothers years earlier. Many cards carried tiny brown stains from butter or vanilla. Corners curled from years of use. A favorite meatloaf recipe might have no measurements at all. Instead, it simply read, "Enough breadcrumbs until it looks right." Experience replaced precision. Cooking relied heavily on memory. The cook rarely measured every ingredient exactly. She simply knew. Years of preparing nearly the same meals had trained her hands to recognize the correct amount almost automatically. By the early afternoon, frozen meat might already be thawing safely in the refrigerator. Potatoes waited in a basket beneath the counter. Green beans sat beside the sink, ready to be trimmed. Carrots needed peeling. Celery needed washing. Everything required hands. There were very few shortcuts. Modern bags of pre-cut vegetables did not yet fill supermarket shelves. Preparing dinner often meant beginning with ingredients that looked almost exactly as they had when harvested. Every carrot had to be scrubbed. Every potato inspected. Every lettuce leaf washed individually. The process took time, but it also created a slower rhythm. Preparing dinner became part of the day's natural flow, rather than a final-minute rush. Many women listened to the radio while working. Soft music drifted through the kitchen. News bulletins interrupted regular programming. Advertisements praised instant coffee, breakfast cereal, laundry detergent, and the newest household appliances. Occasionally, a cooking program shared another recipe using canned soup or gelatin. These broadcasts blended quietly into everyday life. The voices became familiar companions during otherwise solitary afternoons. Unlike television, radio allowed both hands to remain busy. The cook could stir gravy while listening to the latest weather forecast. She could peel apples without ever looking away from the cutting board. Although today's kitchens contain countless specialized gadgets, many 1960s homes relied upon remarkably simple tools. A heavy cast iron skillet, wooden spoons darkened from years of use, sharp paring knives, glass measuring cups, mixing bowls stacked neatly inside one another, metal baking sheets, a sturdy rolling pin. Every item earned its place through constant use. Nothing existed merely as decoration. Even wedding gifts eventually showed scratches, worn handles, and faded markings. They became part of family history. Pressure cookers occupied an important place in many kitchens. To modern ears, they sometimes sound mysterious. To families of the 1960s, however, they represented efficiency. They cooked tougher cuts of meat more quickly. Beans softened faster. Stews developed rich flavors without spending an entire day simmering. Of course, pressure cookers also earned a reputation for demanding respect. Stories occasionally circulated about lids opening too early or steam escaping unexpectedly. Whether every story was true hardly mattered. Many children learned to keep a respectful distance whenever the pressure cooker began hissing. Its rhythmic sound became another familiar part of afternoon life. Not every family enjoyed identical circumstances. Some mothers worked outside the home. Teachers, nurses, secretaries, factory workers, and countless others balanced employment with household responsibilities. For them, dinner often required even more careful planning. Meals might be prepared the previous evening. Ingredients chopped before leaving for work. Slow-cooking dishes started early in the morning. Sometimes older children helped finish preparations after school. Family routines adapted to changing realities. Despite popular magazine advertisements showing perfect suburban homemakers, American families lived in many different ways. The idealized picture rarely matched every household. School dismissal created the next wave of activity. Children returned home carrying books, lunchboxes, and stories from the day. Some immediately disappeared outside again to ride bicycles or play baseball. Others wandered directly into the kitchen. Almost every parent recognized the familiar question, "What's for dinner?" The answer often depended on patience. "It'll be ready when it's ready." Sometimes a child lifted the lid from a simmering pot despite being told not to. Sometimes another quietly stole a carrot slice while pretending to help. These tiny moments rarely appeared in family photographs. Yet they happened almost everywhere. Afternoon snacks remained fairly simple. An apple, peanut butter on crackers, a glass of milk, perhaps a homemade cookie if one happened to be available. Parents generally tried to prevent children from eating too much before dinner. The evening meal still held a special importance. It gathered everyone together. Arriving hungry was almost expected. Meanwhile, grocery shopping itself looked quite different from today. Most families visited supermarkets only once or twice each week. Large shopping carts rolled slowly through wide aisles lined with colorful packaging. Many familiar brands were becoming household names. Bright labels promised convenience. Instant mashed potatoes, cake mixes, canned vegetables, frozen fish sticks. These products reflected changing American lifestyles. Manufacturers proudly advertised how much time they could save busy homemakers. Some families embraced these innovations enthusiastically. Others remained loyal to recipes made entirely from scratch. Many households combined both approaches. A homemade roast might be served alongside canned corn. Fresh mashed potatoes could appear beside store-bought dinner rolls. Practicality usually won over perfection. Seasonality still influenced many dinner tables. Although supermarkets offered more variety than previous generations had known, certain fruits and vegetables tasted best only during their natural seasons. Summer tomatoes burst with flavor. Autumn apples arrived crisp and plentiful. Winter sometimes meant relying more heavily on canned or frozen produce. Families noticed these rhythms even if they rarely discussed them. The changing seasons quietly shaped the menu. As the afternoon slowly slipped toward evening, another familiar ritual began. The kitchen filled with increasingly comforting aromas. Onions softened in butter. Garlic sizzled gently. Chicken browned inside the oven. Fresh bread warmed beneath a clean towel. Steam fogged the kitchen windows. Anyone stepping through the front door immediately knew that dinner would not be long. The entire house seemed to announce it. Smell reached every room before the food itself ever appeared. For many fathers arriving home from work, those aromas signaled something deeply reassuring. Long before seeing the table or greeting the family, they recognized dinner through smell alone. Every household developed its own signature scents. Some homes always seemed to smell faintly of cinnamon. Others carried the aroma of coffee. Still others seemed permanently linked to baked bread. These familiar smells became powerful memories. Decades later, many adults would catch the scent of roasting beef or fresh biscuits and find themselves unexpectedly transported back to childhood. Memory often travels through the nose faster than through the eyes. By 5 o'clock, activity accelerated. Potatoes needed draining. Gravy required stirring. The salad had to be tossed. Butter placed on the table before it softened too much. Someone remembered the iced tea. Someone else searched for the missing salt shaker. The family dog positioned itself hopefully beneath the table long before anyone else entered the room. Its timing was excellent. Experience had taught it that dinner occasionally produced dropped morsels. Waiting patiently usually paid off. Outside, porch lights began switching on one by one across the neighborhood. Children heard their names called from front doors. Games paused until tomorrow. Bicycles rolled back into garages. The sounds of the day gradually softened. Across America, thousands upon thousands of kitchens reached the same moment almost simultaneously. The meal was finally ready. Not because a timer on a smartphone announced it. Not because an app delivered it. But because someone's hands, patience, and careful attention had quietly guided dinner from an ordinary afternoon into a shared evening tradition. And in just a few minutes, every chair around the table would be filled. Part 3, gathering around the table. The final minutes before dinner often felt surprisingly busy. Pots were lifted from the stove. The oven door opened with a wave of warm air. Someone remembered the butter at the last possible moment. Someone else searched through a cabinet for the serving bowl that always seemed to disappear when it was needed most. The house, which had been relatively quiet only an hour earlier, now seemed full of small sounds. Silverware touched ceramic plates. Cabinet doors opened and closed. A chair scraped gently across the floor. Water flowed into glasses. The kitchen clock continued its steady ticking, almost unnoticed by everyone who heard it every day. These sounds rarely stood out on their own. Together, however, they formed the familiar soundtrack of an ordinary American evening. Not every family owned a separate formal dining room. Many middle-class homes certainly had one, but quite a few families preferred eating in a breakfast nook or around a kitchen table. The location mattered less than the habit itself. Dinner was expected to happen together whenever possible. This expectation was so common that many people barely questioned it. The evening meal represented one of the few predictable moments when everyone's schedules naturally overlapped. School had ended. Work had finished. Stores were beginning to close. The day slowly gathered everyone back into the same place. There was often an unwritten seating arrangement. Nobody announced it. Nobody posted a chart. Yet somehow everyone knew. The father might occupy one end of the table. The mother often sat nearest the kitchen, making it easier to stand if another serving dish was needed. Children found themselves in the same chairs night after night. Brothers and sisters occasionally argued over places, but the disagreements usually faded once dinner arrived. After months, or even years, the seating became so familiar that changing places could feel strangely uncomfortable. Visitors noticed. Family members usually did not. Routine quietly shaped the room. The table itself reflected practicality rather than elegance. Many middle-class households covered it with a washable vinyl tablecloth. Others preferred polished wood protected by simple placemats. Everyday dishes differed from the fine china, stored carefully inside a cabinet for holidays and special occasions. Those delicate plates might appear only a few times each year. Tonight called for ordinary dinner plates, sturdy enough to survive years of daily use. Some carried tiny chips around the edges. Others displayed faded floral patterns. Each plate had already witnessed thousands of family meals. Before anyone began eating, there was often a brief pause. In many households, someone offered a blessing. The words varied from family to family. Some prayers lasted only a few seconds. Others were slightly longer. Even families who rarely attended church sometimes paused quietly to express gratitude for the meal before them. Children learned to fold their hands. Heads bowed. Voices softened. Then almost immediately afterward, normal conversation returned. The transition happened naturally, as though everyone understood the rhythm without explanation. Once permission was given to begin eating, serving dishes started moving around the table. Unlike modern restaurant portions, meals were commonly served family style. Large bowls of vegetables, a platter of sliced meat, mashed potatoes resting in a deep serving dish, warm rolls tucked beneath a clean cloth to keep them soft. Each person helped themselves, although younger children might receive assistance. Please pass the peas. Would you like another roll? Save some potatoes for your brother. These sentences echoed through countless dining rooms across the country. They were spoken so often that they became almost invisible. Conversation usually developed slowly. No one expected dramatic stories every evening. Instead, dinner became a place where dozens of ordinary moments found their audience. A child proudly described earning a good grade on a spelling test. Another complained about arithmetic homework. Someone mentioned that the neighbor had bought a new car. A father recalled an unusual event at work. A mother talked about running into an old friend at the grocery store. None of these stories would appear in tomorrow's newspaper. Yet for the people sitting around the table, they mattered. Everyday life is built from moments exactly like these. Of course, not every conversation remained cheerful. Brothers teased sisters. Sisters teased brothers. Someone accused another of taking the larger piece of chicken. Parents occasionally settled small disagreements before they became larger ones. Children sometimes arrived at dinner already upset over something that had happened at school. The dinner table became the place where frustration surfaced. Parents listened. Sometimes they offered advice. Sometimes they simply reminded everyone to finish eating before continuing the discussion. Not every problem could be solved before dessert. but at least it was shared. Their television had become an increasingly important part of American life during the 1960s. Yet many parents believed the dinner table should remain separate from it. Television represented entertainment. Dinner represented family. In some homes, the television stayed completely off until dishes were cleared. In others, it remained on quietly in the next room, its distant voices drifting into the kitchen. Children often hurried through meals if a favorite evening program was scheduled. Parents noticed. Whether they approved was another matter. Many insisted that nobody left the table until everyone had finished. Patience formed part of the meal. Their good manners received constant attention. Parents corrected behavior almost automatically. Sit up straight. Use your napkin. Don't talk with your mouth full. Wait until everyone has been served. Children heard these reminders so frequently that they sometimes repeated them to younger siblings. Learning table manners was viewed as preparation for adulthood. Parents believed that polite behavior at home would naturally extend into school, church, workplaces, and society. Dinner therefore became a daily lesson in courtesy. Not every child appreciated the lesson at the time. Many later admitted that it proved useful. One interesting feature of many 1960s dinners was the expectation that children at least try unfamiliar foods. Nobody expected every vegetable to become a favorite. However, refusing even a single bite was often discouraged. You don't have to like it, but you should try it. Those words became familiar across generations. Brussels sprouts, spinach, beets, liver. Certain foods inspired noticeably less enthusiasm than others. Parents remained persistent. Children remained skeptical. The conversation repeated itself with remarkable consistency. Waste was generally discouraged. Many adults sitting around those tables had grown up during the Great Depression or had parents who vividly remembered it. Food carried meaning beyond its price. Throwing away edible meals felt unnecessary, sometimes even disrespectful. Children were encouraged to finish reasonable portions. Leftovers found their way into tomorrow's lunch or another evening's casserole. A roast chicken rarely disappeared after one meal. Bones might flavor soup. Remaining meat could become sandwiches. Almost everything served another purpose. Frugality had become habit rather than hardship. Dinner also reflected changing American culture. Convenience foods were appearing more often. A can of green beans sat comfortably beside homemade mashed potatoes. Instant pudding might follow a roast prepared from scratch. Families balanced tradition with innovation. Advertisements promised easier cooking through modern products. Some innovations genuinely saved time. Others became passing trends. The average dinner table quietly displayed America's changing relationship with technology long before computers entered the home. For teenagers, dinner sometimes represented negotiation. Friday night plans needed parental approval. Borrowing the family car required careful timing. School dances, football games, movie theaters, part-time jobs. Social lives expanded quickly during adolescence. Parents often discovered these plans while passing the gravy. Dinner naturally became the family meeting. Schedules were discussed, curfews established, permissions requested, compromises reached. No formal agenda existed. Yet surprisingly important decisions emerged between bites of meatloaf and spoonfuls of corn. Younger children rarely noticed how quickly these evenings passed. To them, dinner simply happened. Adults, however, often recognized the comfort hidden inside routine. For perhaps 30 or 40 minutes, everyone occupied the same room. Nobody hurried toward another appointment. Nobody stared at a glowing screen. Attention remained focused on the people sitting only a few feet away. Conversation wandered naturally. Silence occasionally settled over the table without feeling awkward. The meal created space for both words and quiet. Outside the windows, daylight slowly faded. Streetlights flickered on. Neighbors across the block finished their own meals. Some washed dishes immediately. Others lingered over coffee. Across thousands of suburban streets, similar scenes unfolded almost simultaneously. Different recipes, different families, different conversations, yet remarkably similar rhythms. History often remembers the speeches delivered in crowded halls or the treaties signed beneath bright lights. Far less attention is given to the millions of ordinary dinners that quietly shaped how children learned kindness, responsibility, patience, and belonging. Perhaps those lessons, repeated night after night around simple kitchen tables, influenced the future just as much as many famous events. When the final bites disappeared and chairs slowly pushed back from the table, dinner itself had ended. But another familiar ritual was only just beginning. The dishes were waiting. And in a 1960s American household, washing them was rarely a one-person task. Part 4 after the meal, dishes, dessert, and the quiet evening. Dinner rarely ended the moment the last bite was eaten. Instead, it slowly dissolved into another familiar routine. Someone leaned back in a chair with a satisfied sigh. Another reached for the last dinner roll, asking politely if anyone else wanted it first. A child stared hopefully toward the kitchen, wondering if dessert might appear. Parents exchanged a quick glance that seemed to answer several unspoken questions at once. Was everyone finished? Could the leftovers be put away? Who was going to help clean the table? The meal itself had lasted perhaps half an hour. The work surrounding it would continue a little longer. Unlike many restaurants today, where plates disappear almost instantly, a family dinner in the mid-1960s often lingered. Conversation slowed. The urgency of serving hot food had passed. People became more relaxed. Someone remembered an amusing story from work. A child suddenly recalled tomorrow's spelling test. Perhaps a newspaper folded beside one chair tempted its owner to glance at the evening headlines. No one seemed especially rushed. The evening still stretched comfortably ahead. Eventually, the first person stood. That simple movement usually signaled the beginning of cleanup. Children often knew exactly what was expected. One gathered forks and spoons. Another carried glasses to the sink with great care, hoping not to drop them. Older children might scrape leftover food into a small container or wrap remaining bread in wax paper. Parents believed that helping after dinner was simply part of being a member of the family. Not every child volunteered enthusiastically. Many required gentle reminders. Some required reminders that were not quite so gentle. Still, helping became part of the routine. The kitchen sink quickly filled with dishes. In many middle-class homes, there was no automatic dishwasher. Although dishwashers certainly existed by the 1960s, they had not yet become standard in every household. As a result, washing dishes remained an everyday chore performed by hand. Hot water filled one side of the sink. Soap bubbles floated across the surface. The familiar scent of dishwashing liquid mixed with the fatting aroma of dinner. Plates disappeared beneath warm water one by one. Then cups. Then serving bowls. Finally, the large roasting pan that always seemed the most difficult to clean. Drying dishes often became a shared task. One person washed, another dried, a third carefully returned everything to its proper cabinet. Over time, everyone learned exactly where each plate belonged. The cereal bowls occupied one shelf, the coffee mugs another. Large serving dishes rested above the refrigerator, used mostly for Sunday dinners or holiday meals. Even children gradually memorized the kitchen's quiet geography. Without realizing it, they could navigate cabinets almost with their eyes closed. Their kitchen towels played an important role. Most were made of cotton, decorated with simple stripes or cheerful printed designs. After drying countless dishes, they eventually became damp. Someone replaced them with a fresh towel from a nearby drawer. Nothing about this task seemed remarkable. Yet it repeated itself almost every evening, creating another tiny rhythm in the life of the household. History often overlooks such routines because they appear too ordinary. Yet ordinary routines are exactly what most people remember when thinking back on childhood. While dishes were being washed, leftovers received careful attention. Nothing was simply tossed into the trash without thought. A remaining slice of meatloaf might become tomorrow's lunch. Extra mashed potatoes could accompany another meal later in the week. Cooked vegetables sometimes found new life inside soups or casseroles. Glass containers, aluminum foil, and wax paper protected these leftovers inside the refrigerator. Plastic storage containers were becoming more common, but glass dishes still dominated many kitchens. Opening the refrigerator after dinner often revealed a collection of carefully covered bowls waiting patiently for another day. The refrigerators themselves looked rather different from modern models. Many featured rounded edges and sturdy metal handles. The freezer compartment was usually smaller. Ice sometimes formed along its walls and needed to be chipped away occasionally. Magnets decorated the outside, holding shopping lists, school notices, or postcards from relatives. Some families displayed children's report cards proudly on the refrigerator door. Others attached calendars marked with birthdays and appointments. The refrigerator quietly served as both an appliance and a family bulletin board. Not every dinner ended with dessert. Modern restaurants often make dessert seem like the natural conclusion to every meal. Many middle-class families in the 1960s viewed it differently. Dessert was appreciated, certainly, but it was not guaranteed. Sometimes fresh fruit appeared instead. A sliced apple, a handful of grapes, perhaps an orange carefully peeled at the table. Other evenings brought something sweeter. Vanilla ice cream, chocolate pudding, rice pudding sprinkled lightly with cinnamon, a homemade cookie left from the weekend, or perhaps a simple slice of pie if one happened to be available. The decision depended on the day, the budget, and what ingredients remained in the pantry. Homemade desserts remained especially popular. Apple pie, cherry pie, peach cobbler during the summer, bread pudding made from slightly stale bread. These recipes reflected a practical philosophy. Very little was wasted. Even older ingredients often found delicious new purposes. A loaf of bread that had become too firm for sandwiches could still become dessert. Frugality and creativity worked together. No one considered this unusual. It was simply good housekeeping. Coffee frequently appeared after dinner, especially for adults. The rich aroma drifted through the kitchen once again. Some fathers relaxed with a newspaper while sipping a fresh cup. Mothers might finally sit down after spending much of the afternoon preparing the meal. Neighbors occasionally stopped by unexpectedly. If they did, coffee often appeared almost automatically. Hospitality required little ceremony. A fresh pot of coffee and a few minutes of conversation were usually enough. The children, meanwhile, returned to their own evening routines. Homework waited. Perhaps piano practice. Maybe reading assignments from school. Younger children resumed playing with toys spread across the living room floor. Teenagers disappeared into bedrooms where portable record players filled the air with popular music of the decade. The house gradually scattered once more. Dinner had briefly gathered everyone together. Now the evening gently carried each family member toward different activities. Outside, the neighborhood grew quieter. The cheerful shouts of children playing baseball in empty lots faded away. Garden hoses watered flower beds before being neatly coiled. Screen doors opened and closed with their familiar spring-loaded snap. Porch lights glowed warmly against the deepening twilight. Some families took short evening walks around the block. Others remained indoors, enjoying the cooler temperatures after a warm summer day. There was no urgency. The pace of the evening seemed slower than many people experience today. Television now began claiming more attention. Popular programs aired during the evening hours. Families gathered in living rooms around a single television set. The screen was modest by modern standards. Its picture occasionally required adjustment. Children sometimes volunteered to change channels, not because they wanted to help, but because someone had to walk across the room and turn the dial. Remote controls were still rare. Changing the channel required actual movement. As simple as that sounds, it subtly shaped viewing habits. People often watched whatever happened to be on, instead of endlessly searching for alternatives. Meanwhile, the kitchen slowly returned to order. Counters were wiped clean. The stove cooled. Pots hung once again in their familiar places. The dish towel was draped neatly over the oven handle. By the time everything was finished, it might seem almost impossible that only an hour earlier the room had been filled with steam, conversation, and the aroma of roasting meat. The transformation happened every evening. Busy kitchens became peaceful once again. Perhaps the most remarkable feature of these evenings was not the food itself. It was the consistency. Monday looked somewhat like Tuesday. Tuesday resembled Wednesday. Dinner came at nearly the same hour. Cleanup followed the same pattern. The house gradually became quiet before bedtime. Children found reassurance in routines, even if they never noticed them. Adults often depended upon those routines even more. Life outside the home could be unpredictable. Inside the home, familiar rituals created a sense of stability. Looking back today, it is easy to imagine these evenings through a soft lens of nostalgia. Yet real families remained wonderfully imperfect. Children argued over chores. Someone occasionally dropped a plate. Gravy spilled onto the tablecloth. The pie crust sometimes burned. A father returned home late from work. A mother felt exhausted after a long day. Not every dinner was peaceful. Not every conversation ended happily. That ordinary imperfection is exactly what made these evenings real. They were not carefully staged magazine photographs. They were lived experiences. Messy at times, busy at times, comforting most of the time. Long after the dishes had been dried and the lights in the kitchen switched off, the memory of dinner quietly remained. Not because every meal was extraordinary. Quite the opposite. It was the repetition, the dependable rhythm of sitting together, sharing food, talking about ordinary days, and helping clean afterward, that slowly became woven into family life. No single dinner defined a childhood. Thousands of simple dinners did. And tomorrow evening, almost without anyone thinking about it, the entire routine would begin again. Part 5. What's really on the menu? The most common weeknight dinners. If you could quietly open the front door of 100 middle-class American homes on an ordinary weekday evening in 1966, you would certainly notice one thing. The dinners would not all be the same. One family might be serving roast chicken. Another might be enjoying spaghetti. A third could have a bubbling casserole fresh from the oven. Yet despite these differences, familiar patterns would quickly emerge. Certain meals appeared again and again. They became trusted favorites, not because they were fashionable, but because they were dependable. They fit the family budget. They could feed several people. And perhaps most importantly, everyone already knew how to make them. Among all the meals of the decade, few carried the quiet reputation of meatloaf. Today, some people smile at the very mention of it. Others remember it with genuine affection. In the 1960s, however, meatloaf was simply practical. Ground beef cost less than many other cuts of meat. By adding breadcrumbs, eggs, onions, milk, and seasonings, a family could prepare a filling meal without spending too much money. Every household seemed to have its own version. Some mixed ketchup into the meat. Others spread it across the top before baking. Some preferred tomato sauce. Others added a little brown sugar for sweetness. There was no single correct recipe. Only family tradition. Beside the meatloaf almost always sat mashed potatoes. Preparing them required patience. Potatoes were peeled by hand. They boiled until tender. Then they were mashed with butter and milk until smooth. Some cooks preferred a few small lumps, believing they gave the potatoes character. Others mashed until perfectly creamy. A generous spoonful of homemade gravy often completed the plate. For many Americans, this combination represented comfort itself. Simple, warm, familiar. Another common dinner centered around fried chicken. Preparing it took considerable effort. Chicken pieces were coated in seasoned flour before being lowered carefully into hot oil inside a heavy skillet. The sizzling sound filled the kitchen. The aroma drifted through open windows into the evening air. Unlike many modern fast food versions, homemade fried chicken demanded time. Each batch cooked patiently, golden brown on the outside, tender inside. It often appeared on Sundays, but was not limited to special occasions. Leftover pieces tasted just as good the following day, making them ideal for lunches. Roast beef also occupied an important place on many tables. Larger cuts of meat were usually reserved for weekends when families had more time. Still, leftovers transformed easily into weekday dinners. Thin slices became sandwiches. Remaining vegetables entered hearty soups. Nothing was allowed to go to waste. A single roast sometimes provided meal across several days. Families rarely thought of this as clever. It was simply sensible. Spaghetti gradually became more common during the 1960s. Italian-American cuisine had already influenced American eating habits for decades, but now pasta dishes spread far beyond neighborhoods with Italian roots. A pot of spaghetti could feed several hungry children at modest cost. The sauce varied greatly. Some simmered tomatoes for hours. Others relied on canned tomato sauce, enhanced with onions, garlic, and herbs. Grated Parmesan cheese appeared at the table, inside a familiar green container. Children often sprinkled far more than necessary. Parents usually smiled and allowed it. Macaroni and cheese remained another reliable favorite. Many families prepared it from scratch using butter, flour, milk, and shredded cheese. Others embraced boxed versions that had recently become increasingly popular. Advertisements promised convenience. Busy parents appreciated anything that shortened cooking time. Whether homemade or boxed, macaroni and cheese offered warmth, affordability, and dependable satisfaction. Few children complained when it appeared. Their casseroles perhaps defined middle-class American cooking more than any other style of meal. They reflected efficiency. Almost anything could become a casserole. Cooked chicken, ground beef, tuna, rice, noodles, frozen vegetables, canned vegetables. Everything gathered inside one baking dish before entering the oven. Cream-based canned soups frequently served as the binding ingredient. Cream of mushroom, cream of chicken, cream of celery. These soups became pantry staples because they simplified cooking dramatically. Entire cookbooks celebrated casserole recipes. Church gatherings, neighborhood potlucks, and family dinners all welcomed them. One particularly famous example was the tuna noodle casserole. Today it often inspires mixed reactions. During the 1960s, however, it represented an economical family meal. Egg noodles, canned tuna, cream of mushroom soup, peas, sometimes crushed potato chips sprinkled across the top before baking. It required relatively little preparation and stretched ingredients surprisingly far. Many families kept everything needed already stored inside the pantry. Dinner could come together quickly without another trip to the grocery store. Vegetables almost always accompanied the main course. Corn, green beans, carrots, peas, lima beans, beets. Some arrived fresh during harvest season. Others came frozen. Many emerged from brightly labeled cans, stacked neatly inside kitchen cupboards. Modern diners sometimes assume canned vegetables were considered inferior. Yet in the 1960s, they represented remarkable convenience. Families appreciated being able to enjoy vegetables throughout the year regardless of season. Salads looked somewhat different from those commonly served today. A simple lettuce salad with tomatoes and cucumbers remained popular. So did coleslaw. Potato salad often appeared during warmer months. And then there were gelatin salads. Brightly colored gelatin molded into decorative shapes, sometimes containing fruit, occasionally vegetables, perhaps cottage cheese, sometimes even miniature marshmallows. Modern audiences often find these combinations surprising. At the time, they reflected creativity and contemporary taste. Cookbooks enthusiastically promoted such recipes. Guests admired their colorful appearance. Children sometimes cared more about the bright colors than the ingredients. Bread nearly always found a place at the table. Dinner rolls, white sandwich bread, biscuits, cornbread in southern states. Bread served practical purposes. It filled hungry stomachs. It soaked up gravy. It accompanied soup. Children occasionally used the last piece to wipe every remaining drop of sauce from their plates before parents reminded them to use a fork instead. Milk remained the standard beverage for children. Adults frequently chose coffee, iced tea, or water. Soft drinks certainly existed, but many families reserved them for weekends, celebrations, or visits from guests. Drinking soda every evening had not yet become routine in most households. A cold glass of milk seemed entirely ordinary. Parents viewed it as nourishing. Children sometimes preferred something sweeter. Parents usually won that discussion. Regional differences quietly shaped dinner tables across America. In the South, fried okra, collard greens, and cornbread appeared regularly. In New England, Baked beans and seafood enjoyed greater popularity. The Midwest favored hearty casseroles and roast dinners. The Southwest incorporated stronger Mexican influences. California, already developing its own food culture, often experimented with fresher produce and lighter meals. America was never eating exactly the same dinner everywhere. Its diversity could already be tasted from one region to another. The season also influenced menus more than many people realize. Summer gardens overflowed with tomatoes, cucumbers, beans, and zucchini. Neighbors sometimes exchanged surplus vegetable across backyard fences. Autumn brought apples, pumpkins, and squash. Winter relied more heavily on canned goods and stored vegetables. Spring welcomed the return of fresh greens. Although supermarkets expanded year-round availability, nature still quietly influenced dinner choices. Families noticed these changes without necessarily discussing them. The seasons simply guided the menu. Their children naturally developed favorites. One sibling loved mashed potatoes. Another preferred fried chicken. Someone always requested extra gravy. Someone carefully pushed peas into tiny piles while hoping no one would notice. Parents became experts at recognizing these habits. Occasionally, they insisted that everyone eat at least a little of everything. Negotiations over vegetables became almost as dependable as the vegetables themselves. Not every experiment succeeded. Magazine advertisements constantly introduced exciting new recipes. Some became household classics. Others quietly disappeared after one disappointing attempt. Perhaps a casserole looked much better in the photograph than on the dinner table. Perhaps a new seasoning failed to impress. Families politely finished the meal. The recipe card quietly moved toward the back of the recipe box, where it might remain untouched for years. Even ordinary kitchens had their forgotten culinary adventures. Looking back, the most remarkable thing about these dinners was not luxury. It was balance. Meals were designed to satisfy hunger, stretch the family budget, and bring everyone together for a short while before the evening continued. No one expected perfection. The mashed potatoes might contain a few lumps. The biscuits might brown unevenly. The pie crust might crack. None of those imperfections mattered very much. The true purpose of dinner was never to impress strangers. It was to feed the people who called the house a home. And as the decade continued, the dinner table itself would begin to reflect something much larger than changing recipes. The world outside the front door was changing rapidly. Television, advertising, supermarkets, and new technologies were slowly reshaping the American dinner, one meal at a time. Part 6. When modern convenience came to the dinner table. History often remembers the 1960s as a decade of dramatic change. People think about rockets lifting toward the moon. They think about television broadcasts watched by millions. They remember new music, changing fashions, and remarkable scientific achievements. Yet some of the most meaningful changes happened much closer to home. They happened inside ordinary kitchens. Not with loud announcements. Not overnight. But one grocery trip, one advertisement, and one family dinner at a time. The American dinner table was slowly becoming more modern. Most families hardly noticed the transformation while it was happening. Imagine stepping into a supermarket during the middle of the decade. The building feels bright and spacious. Fluorescent lights shine across polished floors. Shopping carts roll gently through wide aisles. Soft music plays somewhere overhead. Colorful packages line shelf after shelf, stretching farther than many shoppers of earlier generations could have imagined. Only a few decades before, many Americans had purchased food from smaller neighborhood shops. A butcher sold meat. A baker sold bread. A greengrocer offered fresh produce. Now, much of the week's shopping could happen under one roof. For busy families, this felt almost revolutionary. The supermarket itself encouraged exploration. New products appeared constantly. Every visit seemed to introduce another convenient idea. Cake mixes that required only water and eggs. Instant puddings that set in minutes. Frozen vegetables already washed and prepared. Ready-made pie crusts. Canned sauces. Box stuffing. Bright packaging promised something that every busy household appreciated. More time. Whether these products actually saved as much time as advertisements claimed was another matter. But the promise itself proved irresistible. Television played an important role in introducing these new foods. Evening commercials appeared between popular programs. Smiling families gathered around spotless dinner tables. Cheerful mothers effortlessly prepared delicious meals. Children happily cleaned every plate. Fathers praised dinner with enthusiastic smiles. The message remained remarkably consistent. Modern products created modern families. Real life, of course, was usually more complicated. Recipes occasionally failed. Children still disliked certain vegetables. Dinner still burned if someone forgot the oven. But advertising painted an appealing picture of effortless domestic success. Many homemakers approached these new products with cautious curiosity. Some embraced every innovation. Others preferred traditional cooking methods they had learned from parents and grandparents. Most families found themselves somewhere between these two extremes. Perhaps tonight's dinner included homemade mashed potatoes alongside canned green beans. Tomorrow's dessert might come from a boxed cake mix. Convenience foods rarely replaced home cooking entirely. Instead, they quietly blended into existing routines. The old and the new shared the same dinner table. Frozen foods became especially popular. The freezer compartment inside many refrigerators was still modest in size, yet it offered possibilities that previous generations had never enjoyed. Fish sticks, frozen peas, frozen corn, television dinners, ice cream. Families appreciated having meals ready for evenings when unexpected events disrupted carefully planned schedules. A long day at work, a school meeting, a sick child. Life did not always cooperate with dinner plans. Frozen food provided welcome flexibility. Perhaps no product symbolized modern convenience more than the television dinner. Packaged neatly inside divided aluminum trays, these meals offered several different foods prepared together. Perhaps sliced turkey, mashed potatoes, peas, a small dessert tucked neatly into one corner. Everything heated inside the oven at the same time. For some families, television dinners represented exciting modern living. For others, they remained an occasional novelty rather than an everyday meal. Many parents still believed that family dinners should involve everyone sitting together around one table. Eating separate meals while watching television felt unusual to them. Yet the idea had quietly arrived. Kitchen appliances also continued improving. Electric mixers became increasingly common. They saved tired arms from endless stirring. Blenders introduced entirely new possibilities. Milkshakes, smooth soups, homemade sauces. Children often watched with fascination as ingredients disappeared beneath spinning blades before emerging transformed only seconds later. The blender seemed almost magical. Its loud humming sound announced that something interesting was about to happen. Electric can openers also entered more kitchens. Today they may seem ordinary. At the time, they represented another small convenience. Opening several cans during dinner preparation became easier and faster. Every saved minute mattered. Household chores filled entire days. Anything reducing physical effort attracted attention. Modern living promised efficiency. Manufacturers eagerly competed to deliver it. Meanwhile, cookbooks began changing as well. Earlier generations emphasized recipes created entirely from fresh ingredients. Newer cookbooks increasingly incorporated branded products. A recipe might specifically recommend one particular canned soup or box seasoning. Food companies published recipe booklets that encouraged creative uses for their products. Some became surprisingly popular. Families clipped recipes from newspapers and magazines, adding them to growing collections stored inside kitchen drawers. The recipe box became a record of changing American tastes. Supermarkets also expanded the variety of foods available. Fresh oranges no longer seemed limited to certain seasons. Exotic fruits occasionally appeared. Different cheeses became easier to purchase. International foods slowly entered ordinary shopping carts. Italian dishes gained popularity. Chinese-inspired meals became more familiar. Mexican flavors spread into regions where they had previously been uncommon. America's dinner table gradually reflected a broader world. Travel was increasing. Immigration continued. Curiosity about other cuisines quietly grew. Children often became enthusiastic supporters of modern packaged foods. Colorful breakfast cereals, sweet desserts, frozen treats, new snacks advertised during Saturday morning television. Bright packaging caught young eyes immediately. Parents sometimes resisted these requests. Budgets remained important. Nutrition mattered. Still, every grocery trip involved quiet negotiations between marketing and practicality. The shopping cart revealed those compromises one item at a time. Advertising also influenced expectations about appearance. Cookbooks and commercials displayed perfectly arranged meals. Vegetables looked brighter. Roasts appeared flawlessly browned. Dessert stood impossibly tall. Real family dinners rarely looked exactly the same. Gravy spilled. Bread leaned sideways. Peas rolled across plates. Yet none of those small imperfections reduced the enjoyment of sharing a meal. The photograph represented aspiration. The dinner table represented reality. Both existed side by side. One interesting feature of the decade was growing confidence in science and technology. Many Americans believed the future would solve almost every problem. Household technology reflected this optimism. New appliances promised cleaner kitchens, faster cooking, less effort, greater convenience. The kitchen itself increasingly resembled a place where modern engineering met everyday family life. Chrome finishes gleamed beneath bright lights. Buttons replaced manual effort. Electricity quietly transformed familiar tasks. Yet despite all these innovations, many important traditions remained unchanged. Families still gathered around tables. Children still set the silverware. Parents still reminded everyone to eat their vegetables. Recipes handed down through generations still appeared regularly. Holiday meals still relied on family favorites rather than the newest advertisement. Technology changed the tools. It did not immediately change the meaning of dinner. The meal remained a daily opportunity to pause, reconnect, and share ordinary moments. Outside the kitchen, American society continued moving rapidly forward. New highways connected distant cities. Shopping centers expanded. Suburbs stretched farther outward. More families owned 2 cars. More mothers gradually entered the workforce. These broader social changes slowly influenced dinner schedules as well. Some families ate earlier, others later. Weeknight routines became slightly more flexible. Yet the desire to share at least one meal together remained remarkably strong. Even children sensed that the world around them was changing. They saw new products appear on grocery shelves. They watched colorful commercials between favorite television programs. They noticed neighbors buying modern appliances. Without realizing it, they were growing up during a period when American eating habits were quietly evolving. The changes seemed small from one week to the next. Viewed across the entire decade, however, they became unmistakable. The American dinner table had begun a transformation that would continue for generations. Still, despite frozen foods, electric mixers, television commercials, and supermarket aisles filled with modern convenience, one thing remained impossible to purchase in a box: the feeling created when an entire family gathered together at the end of the day. That simple moment, ordinary, predictable, and often taken for granted, remained the true centerpiece of dinner. And perhaps nowhere was that feeling more noticeable than during the special meals reserved for Sundays, birthdays, holidays, and family celebrations, when everyday dinners quietly gave way to something just a little more memorable. Part 7. Sunday suppers, birthdays, and holiday feasts. For most families, weekday dinners followed a comfortable rhythm. The recipes were familiar. The conversations were ordinary. The routines changed very little from one evening to the next. Yet every so often, something felt different before anyone even sat down. Perhaps the good dishes had been taken from the cabinet. A white tablecloth covered the dining room table. The smell coming from the oven seemed richer than usual. Someone was baking instead of simply cooking. Without saying a word, everyone understood. Tonight was not just another dinner. Sunday occupied a special place in many middle-class American households. Although every family observed the day differently, Sunday evening often carried its own quiet traditions. For many, it was the final pause before another busy week. Church services had ended hours earlier. Afternoon visits with relatives were winding down. Children knew that school would return in the morning. Parents thought about work waiting on Monday. Sunday dinner became a bridge between rest and responsibility. It encouraged everyone to slow down just a little longer before ordinary life resumed. Unlike hurried weekday meals, Sunday suppers often took more time to prepare. A roast beef might spend several hours in the oven. Chicken roasted slowly until the skin turned crisp and golden. Fresh bread baked while vegetables simmered gently on the stove. Gravy received extra attention. Dessert was rarely an afterthought. The entire meal felt slightly more generous. Not extravagant, simply more deliberate. The extra effort reflected the importance of the occasion rather than the size of the budget. Many families also used Sunday as an opportunity to gather with grandparents, aunts, uncles, or cousins. In the suburbs, relatives might drive across town. In rural communities, they sometimes traveled several miles along quiet country roads. Cars slowly filled driveways. Children hurried outside to greet arriving cousins. Adults exchanged warm handshakes and familiar smiles. Inside the kitchen, someone quietly counted chairs to make sure everyone would have a place at the table. Finding enough seating occasionally required creativity. The regular dining table might comfortably hold 6 people. But today there were 10. Or 12. Perhaps even more. A folding table appeared from the basement. Extra chairs arrived from neighboring rooms. Children often sat together at a smaller table nearby. Far from considering this unfair, many actually preferred it. Away from the adults, conversations became livelier. Giggles spread more easily. Someone inevitably spilled a glass of milk. Fortunately, everyone expected such things to happen. The menu itself often reflected family traditions passed down through generations. Recipes traveled with people as they moved across the country. A grandmother from the South might prepare cornbread exactly as her own mother had taught her decades earlier. An Italian-American family continued making pasta, using methods brought from Europe years before. A family with German roots baked favorite breads remembered from childhood. Across America, countless cultural traditions quietly blended into everyday life. The Sunday table became a place where family history could be tasted as much as remembered. Conversation during these larger gatherings moved differently from weekday dinners. Adults discussed work, neighborhood news, or recent events appearing in newspapers. Grandparents recalled stories from decades earlier. Children listened for a few minutes before returning to conversations of their own. Teenagers exchanged knowing glances whenever adults repeated familiar family stories. Everyone had heard them before. Yet somehow, every gathering included them again. No one truly minded. The stories themselves had become tradition. Their birthdays brought another welcome change to the dinner table. The meal might not differ dramatically from an ordinary evening, but small details certainly did. The birthday person's favorite dinner usually appeared on the menu. Perhaps fried chicken, maybe spaghetti, or meatloaf served exactly the way they liked it. The celebration centered less on expensive gifts and more on making one family member feel especially important for a single evening. Children eagerly anticipated choosing the menu months in advance. After dinner came the birthday cake. Homemade cakes remained common throughout the decade. Chocolate, vanilla, yellow cake with rich frosting. Perhaps a layer cake decorated carefully by hand. Candles were placed gently across the top. The room lights dimmed. Everyone gathered close. The familiar birthday song filled the room. Some children closed their eyes tightly before making a wish. No one asked what the wish had been. That remained a quiet little secret. Their holiday dinners carried even greater significance. Although each holiday had its own traditions, Thanksgiving perhaps stood above all others. Preparations often began several days ahead. Shopping lists grew longer. Relatives confirmed arrival times. The largest roasting pan emerged from storage. The dining room received a thorough cleaning. Children sometimes polished silverware or folded napkins under careful supervision. The excitement built gradually, rather than arriving all at once. Thanksgiving dinner represented one of the year's great family events. Turkey naturally occupied the center of many Thanksgiving tables. Stuffing filled the bird. Mashed potatoes stood nearby. Gravy flowed generously. Green beans, sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce, dinner rolls, pumpkin pie waiting patiently in the kitchen. Every family adjusted the menu according to regional tastes and personal preferences. Yet the spirit remained remarkably similar. Gratitude, togetherness, abundance, not because every family possessed great wealth, but because sharing a meal with loved ones felt deeply meaningful. Their Christmas dinners varied more widely. Some families served turkey again. Others preferred ham. Still others prepared roast beef or regional specialties. The decorations surrounding the meal made it feel different from every other dinner of the year. Colored lights glowed softly from the Christmas tree nearby. Wrapped presents waited beneath its branches. Holiday music drifted quietly through the house. Even familiar recipes somehow tasted slightly different during the festive season. Perhaps memory added its own special seasoning. Their children experienced these celebrations very differently from adults. Adults often remembered shopping, budgeting, cooking, and cleaning. Children remembered excitement. The smell of cookies baking, sneaking tiny pieces of frosting when no one seemed to notice, watching grandparents laugh at old stories, waiting impatiently to discover dessert, running outside with cousins before being called back inside again. Years later, many adults would discover that these childhood memories remained surprisingly vivid. Not because every detail had been extraordinary, but because they had been shared. Their photographs also played an important role during special dinners. Cameras required film. Every photograph mattered. Someone carefully arranged family members before pressing the shutter. People smiled patiently. Sometimes no one smiled until the photographer reminded them. The resulting pictures eventually found places inside family albums. Decades later, grandchildren would study those photographs with quiet curiosity, examining hairstyles, clothing, furniture, the shape of the dining table. Without intending to, every family preserved tiny pieces of history simply by taking pictures before dessert. Of course, not every holiday unfolded perfectly. The turkey occasionally finished later than expected. Children became impatient. The pie crust cracked. Someone forgot an ingredient. Snowstorms delayed relatives. A cake leaned slightly to one side. These imperfections rarely ruined the celebration. If anything, they often became the stories everyone laughed about years afterward. Perfect dinners rarely become legendary. The imperfect ones often do. Beyond birthdays and holidays, families also celebrated smaller milestones around the dinner table. A graduation, a promotion at work, a military homecoming, an anniversary, even the purchase of a new house. Special meals marked life's important moments. The food itself mattered, certainly. Yet it served another purpose. It gathered people together during moments worth remembering. Across cultures and centuries, sharing food has always strengthened human relationships. The families of 1960s America were simply continuing a tradition much older than the nation itself. As evening settled after one of these special meals, the atmosphere often lingered. Nobody rushed to leave immediately. Coffee cups were refilled. Children continued playing together. Grandparents settled comfortably into living room chairs. The kitchen once again filled with dishes waiting to be washed, but no one seemed especially concerned. There would be time for that. For now, the company mattered more than the cleanup. These unhurried hours became some of the most treasured memories of family life. Not because something remarkable happened, but because for a little while everyone was together. And perhaps that was remarkable enough. Part 8: Growing Up at the Dinner Table. Children, Chores, and Quiet Lessons. If you were 8 years old in a middle-class American family during the mid-1960s, dinner probably seemed like one of the most ordinary parts of your day. You did not think of it as history. You did not wonder how future generations might eat. You simply knew that, sooner or later, someone would call your name. It might come from the kitchen. It might come through the screen door. Sometimes it echoed across the backyard. Dinner's ready. Those two words signaled the end of whatever adventure had filled the afternoon. The baseball game paused. The bicycle was left near the driveway. The comic book closed. Whatever could not be finished now would simply have to wait until tomorrow. Dinner came first. For many children, the journey to the dinner table began with one important stop: the bathroom sink. Parents expected hands to be washed before eating. The reminder came so often that children sometimes raced each other to the sink before anyone had to ask. Soap, warm water, a quick rinse, then the familiar search for a clean towel. To modern ears, it sounds almost too ordinary to mention. Yet this small routine repeated itself nearly every evening in countless American homes. Some children had chores before dinner. Perhaps feeding the family dog. Perhaps bringing in the trash can from the curb. Collecting eggs if the family kept chickens. Watering flowers. Helping carry groceries inside after school. Making sure bicycles were put away. These jobs were usually small, but they carried meaning. Parents believed responsibility developed through repetition. Doing one small task every day slowly became part of growing up. Children often complained. Most completed the chore anyway. Setting the table became one of the most common responsibilities. Older children rarely needed instructions anymore. They already knew where everything belonged. Dinner plates first, then forks on the left, knives and spoons on the right, glasses near the upper corner, napkins folded neatly beside each plate. Some families followed formal traditions. Others kept things much simpler. Either way, children gradually memorized the arrangement without realizing they were learning. Eventually, setting the table became almost automatic. Occasionally, mistakes happened. A spoon ended up where a fork belonged. One place setting accidentally received two knives. Someone forgot the salt shaker. Nobody considered these errors especially serious. They simply became opportunities to learn. A parent quietly corrected the mistake. Tomorrow evening, the child usually remembered. Learning often happened through gentle repetition rather than formal instruction. Dinner also introduced children to patience. Unlike today, when many snacks remained available throughout the evening, children often arrived genuinely hungry. Wonderful smells had drifted through the house for the past hour. The roast was finished. The vegetables were ready. Yet everyone still had to wait until the entire meal reached the table. Only then could eating begin. Waiting those few extra minutes sometimes felt like the longest part of the day, especially when warm bread sat only inches away. Parents paid close attention to manners. The reminders became almost musical in their regularity. Please. Thank you. Chew before you speak. Sit up straight. Don't reach across the table. Ask someone to pass it. Children probably rolled their eyes occasionally. Still, these phrases slowly became habits. Many adults later discovered themselves repeating the very same reminders to their own children. Without planning to, one generation quietly taught the next. Interrupting adults was generally discouraged. Children certainly participated in conversations. Parents often asked about school, teachers, friends, homework. However, they also expected children to listen while adults spoke. Learning when to speak and when to wait formed another invisible lesson at the dinner table. Not every child mastered it immediately. Most improved with practice. School naturally dominated many conversations. What did you learn today? For parents, this question opened a small window into hours they had not witnessed. The answers varied tremendously. Some children described science experiments with enormous excitement. Others answered simply, "Nothing." Parents usually suspected that more had happened than that. Gentle questions often followed. Eventually, details emerged. A spelling test, a playground disagreement, a new classmate. The dinner table quietly became the family's daily classroom report. Their homework often entered the conversation as well. Perhaps tomorrow included a mathematics quiz. Perhaps a history assignment remained unfinished. Parents reminded children that television could wait until schoolwork was complete. Children sometimes hoped those reminders might be forgotten. They rarely were. Dinner naturally became the time when the evening schedule took shape. Plans were made. Expectations clarified. Everyone understood what still needed to be accomplished before bedtime. Not every lesson centered on school. The dinner table also taught gratitude. Children learned that meals required effort. Someone had purchased the groceries. Someone had planned the menu. Someone had spent hours preparing the food. Cleaning would follow afterward. Parents did not always explain these things directly. Instead, children gradually noticed. As they grew older and accepted more responsibilities themselves, appreciation often developed naturally. Their sharing formed another important lesson. Perhaps only one biscuit remained. Maybe there was enough pie for everyone, but only if each person accepted a modest slice. Children learned that fairness sometimes mattered more than getting exactly what they wanted. Older siblings occasionally allowed younger ones to choose first. Younger siblings occasionally returned the kindness. These moments rarely appeared dramatic, yet they quietly strengthened family relationships. Of course, brothers and sisters still argued. One claimed another had received more mashed potatoes. Someone insisted that the larger piece of cake had gone to the wrong person. A younger brother accidentally bumped an older sister's elbow. Parents settled countless tiny disputes before dessert. Looking back, many adults later laughed about these arguments. At the time, however, they felt extremely important. Childhood has a remarkable ability to magnify very small problems. Their children also developed fascinating relationships with particular foods. One refused peas. Another disliked cooked carrots but happily ate them raw. Someone loved gravy enough to pour it over nearly everything. Another carefully separated every item on the plate so that nothing touched anything else. Parents became remarkably skilled at predicting these preferences. Dinner preparations quietly adapted over time. Perhaps one child received fewer onions. Another enjoyed extra corn. Family cooking gradually reflected the personalities gathered around the table. Their special privileges often arrived with age. Older children poured drinks, used sharper kitchen knives under supervision, carried heavier serving dishes. Eventually, they helped prepare entire meals. Learning to cook rarely happened all at once. It developed through observation, watching, helping, trying, making mistakes, trying again. A teenager who confidently prepared dinner in 1968 had often spent years quietly learning beside a parent or grandparent. Their teenagers experienced dinner somewhat differently than younger children. School activities expanded. Part-time jobs became common. Sports practices ended later. Dadding entered family conversations. The dinner table sometimes became the place where parents first heard about a school dance or weekend plans. Negotiations unfolded politely. What time will you be home? Who else is going? Have you finished your homework first? These conversations represented another stage of growing up. Freedom arrived gradually, one discussion at a time. Sometimes teenagers hurried through dinner, eager to meet friends afterward. Parents noticed. They gently reminded everyone that dinner was about more than eating quickly. It was one of the few times each day when the family could simply be together. Years later, many former teenagers admitted that those shared meals had mattered far more than they realized at the time. What once felt ordinary slowly became precious through memory. Perhaps the greatest gift children received from these dinners was consistency. The world beyond the front door changed rapidly during the 1960s. Schools evolved. Neighborhoods expanded. Television introduced unfamiliar ideas. Yet inside many homes, dinner remained reassuringly familiar. The same table. The same chairs. The same voices. Even when life outside felt uncertain, the evening meal quietly reminded children that some things remained dependable. Most children could never have imagined that, decades later, they would remember these evenings so clearly. They would remember the sound of ice cubes clinking inside a glass of iced tea, the smell of fresh biscuits coming from the oven, the familiar creak of one particular dining room chair, the laughter that followed an uncle's favorite joke, the comforting voice that called everyone to dinner. History often focuses on the grand events that shape nations. But for millions of children growing up in middle-class America during the 1960s, history also lived in much smaller moments. It lived in passing the potatoes, waiting politely for dessert, helping dry the dishes, listening to stories around the table. Those ordinary evenings quietly shaped the adults they would one day become. And as the decade drew to a close, the American dinner table would begin to change in ways that few families could fully predict. The familiar routines remained, but the country surrounding them was entering a new era. Part 9, the end of the decade. A familiar tradition begins to change. As the 1960s slowly approached their final years, most families probably believed that dinner would always feel much the same. The table would remain where it had always been. Children would continue growing. Parents would continue working. The familiar recipes would pass from one generation to the next. From inside the home, the routines appeared wonderfully stable. Yet history has a quiet way of changing ordinary life. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually enough that people often notice only when they look back years later. The American family dinner was no exception. Imagine standing on the same suburban street we visited at the beginning of our journey. It is now late in the decade, perhaps 1969. The neighborhood still looks familiar. Children still ride bicycles. Lawns remain neatly trimmed. Station wagons and family sedans continue filling driveways. Porch lights glow as evening approaches. At first glance, almost nothing seems different. But beneath these familiar sights, American life is slowly shifting. More mothers were entering the workforce than in previous decades. Many had always worked outside the home, of course, particularly in factories, offices, hospitals, schools, and family businesses. But by the end of the decade, dual-income households were becoming more common in many communities. This did not mean family dinners disappeared. Rather, they often required more planning. Meals might be prepared the night before. A slow-cooking dish could begin early in the morning. Teenagers sometimes helped with cooking before parents arrived home. The responsibility for dinner, gradually, became something shared by more members of the household. Work itself was changing. Commutes grew longer in many suburban areas. New highways connected expanding neighborhoods with busy cities. A father who once arrived home at 5:30 might now return closer to 6. Children joined after-school sports, music lessons, and clubs. Schedules no longer fit together quite as neatly as before. Finding a time when everyone could sit together became a little more difficult. Not impossible, simply less automatic. Television also continued changing evening routines. Families still gathered around popular programs, but the number of choices slowly increased. The television became an increasingly powerful presence inside the home. Some parents insisted that dinner remain television-free. Others relaxed that rule from time to time. The debate itself revealed something interesting. Families were trying to balance togetherness with new forms of entertainment. Every household solved that puzzle differently. Supermarkets expanded further. Frozen foods occupied larger sections of the store. Packaged snacks became more abundant. Manufacturers introduced products promising even greater convenience. The language of advertising shifted slightly. Earlier commercials had emphasized saving time. Now they also celebrated freedom. More leisure, less work, more opportunities for modern families. The message suggested that convenience created happiness. Whether happiness could truly be found inside a brightly colored box remained a question each family answered for themselves. Teenagers increasingly developed lives beyond the family home. School dances, athletic competitions, volunteer organizations, part-time jobs, driver's licenses offered new independence. A 16-year-old with access to the family car experienced evenings very differently than an 8-year-old. Parents adjusted. Sometimes dinner moved earlier. Sometimes a plate waited inside the refrigerator for someone arriving home late. The family meal remained important, but flexibility quietly entered the routine. Children born toward the end of the decade would grow up in a somewhat different America than their older brothers and sisters. They would see more convenience foods, more television channels, different fashions, changing music. They might never realize that only a few years earlier, many kitchens operated with fewer appliances and simpler expectations. To them, their own childhood would simply feel normal. Every generation tends to believe its routines have always existed. History gently reminds us otherwise. The recipes themselves also evolved. Some remained almost unchanged. Meatloaf still appeared. Roast chicken still filled Sunday tables. Apple pie still cooled on kitchen counters. Yet new dishes gradually joined them. International flavors became easier to find. Fresh ingredients, once considered unusual, slowly entered neighborhood supermarkets. Families experimented carefully. One new recipe this month. Another next season. Successful dishes stayed. Less popular ones quietly disappeared. The recipe box continued growing. Neighborhoods also changed. Some families moved to larger homes. Others relocated because of new jobs. Children who had once walked to nearby schools now sometimes traveled farther. Grandparents often lived in different cities than they once had. Holiday gatherings required more planning. Long-distance telephone calls remained expensive enough that many conversations stayed brief. Visits therefore became especially meaningful. When relatives gathered around the dinner table, everyone appreciated the occasion. No one knew exactly when the next visit might happen. Looking back today, it might be tempting to imagine the 1960s as a perfectly peaceful era of family dinners and quiet evenings. Reality was naturally more complicated. Families experienced disagreements, financial worries, illness, busy schedules, changing relationships. Not every dinner featured cheerful conversation. Some meals passed almost silently after difficult days. Others included apologies, occasionally tears. Families remained human. Their strength often came not from avoiding problems, but from continuing to gather despite them. Dinner offered another chance to reconnect tomorrow if today had been difficult. One of the most remarkable aspects of these meals was their consistency. History books often focus on extraordinary events. Yet ordinary routines shape ordinary people. A child who learned patience while waiting for everyone to be served. A teenager who discovered responsibility by helping prepare dinner. Parents who quietly listened to stories about school each evening. These repeated experiences influenced character over time. Not because any single dinner changed a life. Because hundreds of dinners quietly worked together. Many adults who later reflected on their childhoods found that they remembered surprisingly small details. The pattern on the tablecloth, the sound of a screen door closing, the weight of a ceramic plate, the smell of onions cooking in butter, the gentle clatter of dishes being dried after the meal. Memory often preserves feelings more faithfully than facts. People may forget exactly what they ate on a Tuesday evening in 1967. They often remember how home felt. Researchers today frequently discuss the value of shared family meals. They study conversation, relationships, communication between parents and children. While families in the 1960s did not usually think in those scientific terms, many instinctively understood something important. Sitting together mattered. Talking mattered. Listening mattered. Even when conversations centered on homework, neighborhood gossip, or tomorrow's weather, the habit itself strengthened family bonds. The dinner table quietly became one of the most reliable meeting places in everyday American life. As the decade ended, the pace of life continued increasing. The 1970s would bring new technologies, different economic challenges, changing work patterns, new ideas about family life. Some traditions would remain surprisingly resilient. Others would gradually fade. Few people living through those changes could fully predict what the future would look like. They simply continued preparing dinner, one evening at a time. Perhaps that is why these ordinary meals remain so fascinating. They remind us that history is not built only from famous speeches, celebrated inventions, or dramatic headlines. History is also built from millions of quiet evenings. Parents asking about school, children setting the table, neighbors exchanging recipes, grandparents passing down family traditions. None of these moments seemed historic while they were happening. Together, however, they created the texture of everyday life. They became the invisible threads connecting one generation to the next. And now, as the dishes have been washed, the kitchen has grown quiet once again. The porch light glows softly outside. The last cup of coffee has been finished. Children have gone to bed. Tomorrow will bring another ordinary day. Another ordinary dinner. Another ordinary evening. At least that is what everyone believes. Only time will reveal that these simple moments will one day become cherished memories of an America that quietly slipped into history. Part 10, A Gentle Reflection, The Last Light in the Kitchen. And now, as our journey through the dinner tables of 1960s middle-class America begins to draw to a close, there is one final scene worth visiting. There is no great celebration, no holiday feast, no birthday candles, no important announcement waiting to be made. It is simply another weekday evening, a perfectly ordinary one. Perhaps it is Tuesday, perhaps Wednesday. The exact day hardly matters. What matters is that, for the family inside the house, it feels completely normal. The kitchen has already been cleaned. The last dinner plate rests safely in the cabinet. A dish towel hangs neatly from the oven handle. The counters have been wiped until they shine softly beneath the overhead light. Only a faint aroma of roasted onions and fresh bread still lingers in the air. If you entered the room now, you might never guess that only an hour ago it had been filled with conversation, laughter, and the gentle clatter of silverware. The busiest room in the house has become the quietest. Outside, evening has settled comfortably across the neighborhood. Streetlights cast warm circles of light onto the sidewalks. A distant dog barks once before falling silent again. Somewhere down the block, a screen door closes with its familiar spring-loaded snap. The sound carries through the calm night air. In another home, someone finishes washing dishes. In another, children are already brushing their teeth before bed. Across the neighborhood, hundreds of families are quietly following remarkably similar routines. No one has planned it. It simply happens. The father settles into his favorite chair, with tomorrow's newspaper folded nearby. Perhaps he reads only a few pages before setting it aside. The workday has been long. The quiet feels welcome. Across the room, the mother checks tomorrow's calendar. There are lunches to prepare in the morning. Groceries that will soon need replacing. A reminder about a parent-teacher meeting. Life continues in its familiar rhythm. There is satisfaction in knowing that today's responsibilities have been completed. Tomorrow will bring another list. Tonight, however, is enough. Children drift toward bedtime in different ways. A younger child carefully places a favorite toy beside the pillow. An older brother quietly finishes a chapter of a library book. A teenage sister listens to music through a small portable record player, turning the volume down when reminded that younger siblings are already asleep. Bedrooms gradually become still. The house grows quieter with every passing minute. The excitement of the day slowly gives way to rest. The family dog circles once before lying down near the back door. Its day has followed familiar patterns too. Morning walks, afternoon naps, waiting patiently beneath the dinner table in hope of a dropped crumb. Now, like everyone else, it settles into the peaceful rhythm of evening. Even household pets become part of family routines. Without realizing it, they help mark the passing of ordinary days. If someone had paused this moment forever, no one inside the house would have imagined that future generations might one day find it fascinating. To them, it was simply life. Ordinary, predictable, comfortably familiar. No one believed that decades later, people would wonder what dinner tasted like, what kitchens looked like, how children behaved at the table, or why families seemed to spend so much time together in the evenings. History has a curious habit of making ordinary moments feel extraordinary. Many of the children sleeping upstairs will one day become parents themselves. Some will keep their mother's meatloaf recipe tucked inside a kitchen drawer. Others will remember exactly how their father carved the Sunday roast. A few may unknowingly repeat familiar phrases. Wash your hands before dinner. Please pass the butter. Finish your vegetables. The words may sound identical, yet the voices speaking them will belong to a new generation. Traditions often survive not because people deliberately preserve them, but because they quietly become habits. As the years pass, kitchens will continue changing. Microwave ovens will become common. Dishwashers will appear in more homes. Computers will eventually arrive. Then the internet. Then smartphones. Recipes once copied carefully onto index cards will be searched for with a few keystrokes. Shopping lists will move from refrigerator magnets to glowing screens. Groceries may even arrive without anyone visiting the store. Technology will transform countless parts of daily life. Yet one simple idea will remain surprisingly resilient. People still enjoy sharing meals with those they care about. The food itself will continue changing too. Some recipes from the 1960s will quietly disappear. Others will become beloved classics. Children who once refused vegetables will laugh years later, while encouraging their own children to eat those very same vegetables. Family recipes will collect small changes along the way. A little less salt, a different seasoning, perhaps another vegetable added to the soup. Every generation leaves its own gentle fingerprint on familiar meals. Of course, memory has a gentle way of polishing the past. When people remember childhood dinners, they rarely remember every disagreement. They forget the evenings when homework caused frustration. They overlook the times someone accidentally burned the biscuits. Instead, memory often preserves warmth. The comforting glow of the dining room light. The sound of laughter after an ordinary joke. The reassuring knowledge that everyone was together. Memory does not always record life exactly as it happened. Sometimes it records how life felt. Historians often study wars, elections, inventions, and economic change. Those events deserve careful attention. They shape the nation in countless important ways. But there is another kind of history. A quieter history. The history of everyday life. The history of families who quietly prepared dinner every evening. Who saved leftovers for tomorrow's lunch. Who taught children good manners without writing instruction manuals. Who celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes. Who welcomed neighbors with coffee after supper. Who created traditions without ever calling them traditions. These ordinary people rarely appeared in history books. Yet together, they formed the heart of the country. Perhaps that is why ordinary dinners remain so meaningful. They remind us that history belongs not only to famous individuals. It belongs equally to millions of anonymous families whose names are now forgotten. Families who laughed around modest kitchen tables, who worried about grocery budgets, who proudly served favorite recipes, who patiently washed dishes before turning out the lights. They shaped the future simply by living ordinary lives. Now, imagine standing once more outside that quiet suburban house. The curtains have been drawn. The porch light still glows beside the front door. Most of the neighborhood has gone dark. Only a few windows remain illuminated. The summer air feels calm. Crickets sing softly somewhere beyond the lawns. Nothing dramatic happens. Nothing needs to. The beauty of this moment lies entirely in its simplicity. Inside the house, tomorrow has already begun in small ways. Lunch boxes wait on the kitchen counter. Fresh bread has been placed where it will be easy to find in the morning. The coffee pot has been rinsed. The calendar still hangs quietly on the wall, ready to greet another day. Life moves forward almost without anyone noticing. One ordinary evening gently becomes another. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson these dinners leave behind. The moments we consider ordinary today often become the memories we treasure most tomorrow. A familiar recipe. A well-used wooden spoon. The sound of chairs being pulled toward the table. The comforting words, "Dinner's ready." None of these seemed especially important while they were happening. Yet together, they created a feeling of home that many people carried with them for the rest of their lives. As our visit comes to an end, the kitchen is completely still. The lights have been switched off. Only the moonlight slips quietly through the window above the sink. The house rests peacefully after another ordinary day. Outside, the neighborhood sleeps. Tomorrow evening, another family somewhere in America will gather around another table. Someone will pass the potatoes. Someone will ask about school. Someone will laugh at a familiar story. And without realizing it, they too will become part of the long, quiet history of everyday life. Thank you for spending this peaceful evening exploring one of the simplest, and perhaps most meaningful, rituals of 1960s middle-class America. For now, the dishes are clean. The house is quiet. The neighborhood has fallen asleep. And it may be time for us to do the same. Good night.